Have you ever seen that those shows about the people that are extremely cheap? Like, I'm not gonna call them cheapskate. I don't know if that's offensive to those people or not, but they live their life trying to spend the least amount of money possible. I remember one clip that was going around in one episode where a guy would walk almost a mile just to fill water bottle jugs at the local park because he didn't want to spend money on his water bill. When I watched that, I always wondered to myself, how would life be, or how would their viewpoint of life change if they weren't as cheap as they were? I think that there is a difference between someone that is cheap compared to someone that likes to save money. I think that there's a healthy balance between the two. There's a difference, but there could be a healthy balance. You don't have to be cheap if you want to save money. In the same breath, I don't think there's ever been a team in sports that found success being cheap. I'm not saying there hasn't been a team that hasn't found success saving money and being smart with how they do things. I think that's the way to win. Being smart with your payroll, being smart with your team, obviously getting the best players, but understanding when to pay people, how to pay people, and how to navigate the salary cap. Obviously, when we're talking about football and basketball. But one thing that I don't think in my entire lifetime I have ever seen is a team win at the highest level being cheap. That's one of the reasons why I'm constantly talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. And I'm constantly saying that they are a poverty franchise, not because their history, which obviously spells poverty since they haven't really won anything, even though they've had some good players. Not because they have, generational talents right now in Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and currently T. Higgins. I call them a poverty franchise because they just continue to do things to perpetuate the narrative that is set around them, which is they are a cheap franchise. I understand how expensive Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson would be if you paid all of them. However, if you would have been smarter and paid them before their deals would have been up, you may not be in the situation that you're in now. The reason why I started this episode with that is because Trey Hendrickson, who was one of the best defensive players, if not the best defensive player last year. I know he didn't win Defensive Player of the Year, but one of the best defensive players, led the league in sacks, and also had contract disputes with the Cincinnati Bengals organization before the season, was granted permission to seek a trade. More than likely, Trey Hendrickson is out when we talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. The same Bengals that's also still struggling with how are they going to pay Jamar Chase and how are they going to pay T. Higgins. I know they franchise tag T. Higgins, but a lot of people are thinking that T. Higgins is not trying to play on a franchise tag again, seeing as though we did that last year. So they're probably going to franchise tag and trade him because they're still trying to figure out how to work out a deal with Jamar Chase, who, again, they just keep messing themselves up. If you would have paid I know that this sounds harsh and this sounds rough, but it is. It's the business. If you would have paid Jamar Chase before last year, before the record-breaking year that he had, he probably would cost less. But again, you're in the situation now that you're in because you don't understand how to be smart with your money. Again, the title, the thing that is talked about the most when we talk about the Cincinnati Bengals is they're a cheap organization. And you can go down the history of sports, not just football, not just basketball, any sport. What team do you know has a reputation of being cheap to their players and also has won at the highest level? Or has won multiple times at the highest level? It doesn't happen. Which is why I have little faith, and I mean absolutely no faith, that the Bengals, even with Joe Burrow, even with Jamar Chase, even if they find a way to get T. Higgins, I have no faith that they're going to be a Super Bowl caliber team. Yes, they have those players, but there's a reason why all of those players, Hendrickson, Chase, and Burrow, had historic years last year. And they still didn't even make the playoffs. I've talked about that ad nauseum on this podcast. Let's not get it twisted here. Trey Hendrickson is a great player. Whatever team he ends up with will be much better than they were before they had Trey Hendrickson. He's not on the same level right now as, let's say, a Myles Garrett or a TJ Watt, but I think that he is just a step below. And that's saying something. He led the league in sacks last year. He's great. And it looks like Sam Hubbard, who was the other star defensive player that the Cincinnati Bengals had, he retired at 29, I believe. So shouts out to him for walking away, being able to walk away from the game when he wants to. It goes back to what I've said time and time again about that quote-unquote championship window. You need to capitalize it when you can, because it doesn't always stay open. I know the famous line from Joe Burrow is, the championship window is however long my career is. Well, as we're seeing, Joe Burrow had the best season of his career last year and didn't even touch the playoffs. And now, as we speak, Trey Hendrickson is more likely gone from the Cincinnati Bengals, who is their best defensive player. The same defense that struggled mightily last year. He was the only bright spot on the defense. Remember, they had Jesse Bates. And Jesse Bates wanted to stay, but they couldn't afford him. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Whoa. I'm sorry. It's not that they could afford him. They just didn't want to pay him what he felt he was worth. You want to know another cheap franchise, another cheap organization as of recently? The Giants. Again, they could have paid Saquon Barkley what the Eagles paid him. They just didn't want to. If you watch Hard Knocks, you see the famous line that they said, we couldn't sleep at night knowing that we're paying a running back as much as he's asking for. Which, might I add, he was asking for less than what he received from Philly. He was asking for less because he wanted to stay with the Giants organization. And we're talking about a cheap organization. Look what the Giants are now compared to where Saquon Barkley and the Eagles are. A team that is smart with their money. What's unfortunate about this whole situation with Trey Hendrickson is he's stated at every single turn, kind of like Saquon did with the with the Giants, he wants to remain a Cincinnati Bengal. But gone are the days where people will continuously take pay cut after pay cut after pay. You know what it is? The model, the pay cut model, the person that's always the poster child for the pay cut is Tom Brady. Every time somebody wants to throw out, you should take a pay cut, they always turn to Tom Brady. They said, look at Tom Brady. He took a pay cut and it benefited the New England Patriots handsomely. You know, he has 7 rings, 6 with the Patriots. That's what happens if you take a pay cut. That is some BS. It really wasn't until later in his, or probably halfway to later in his career, where he started taking pay cuts. And on top of that, Tom Brady is able to take pay cuts because he's winning Super Bowls and getting to Super Bowls. Remember, there was a 10 to 12 year span, I believe, that the Patriots didn't win a Super Bowl with Tom Brady. Well, you think he was taking pay cuts then? No. So when you think that players are going to take pay, there has to be a favorable reward. We have to understand, why am I taking this pay cut? Yeah, Tom Brady can take a pay cut. He's the greatest quarterback of all time. He has rings that's attributed to these pay cuts. When you look at someone like Trey Hendrickson, no offense to him, but he doesn't have anything to fall back on as to why I should trust an organization. If I take a pay cut, how am I going to trust that the organization is going to use that money in building a Super Bowl caliber team? I know we went 4 years ago, but what have we done since then? That's why I understand the whole restructure thing. I get that. That's why I never think that you should take a pay cut. I understand if, people are getting laid off and the only way to keep people's job is if you take a pay cut. I think Stephen A. Smith did that. And I understand that, if you want to keep some of the people that you work with employed, and the only way to do that is take a pay cut, I get it. And for that, I say I understand, and I would obviously consider taking a pay cut if that was the case. But for someone like Trey Hendrickson, who's on a much different scale than me, a much different scale than Stephen A. Smith, even though I don't know anymore. Shouts out to Stephen A. Smith. I think it sounded like a $100 million deal. But I don't see how you don't have the equity built up in the trust stock of these players to think that they're going to take a pay cut because they think they trust you enough to build a franchise. No, hell no. Hell no. What do I look like? What do I look like being on the Arizona Cardinals and you asking me to take a pay cut because we need to build a roster? You've had all this time building a roster. What do you think me taking a pay cut is going to do? What? You can restructure some things, but take a pay cut? Especially if you're Trey Hendrickson and you just had the best season of your career. Same as Jamar Chase. I don't expect Jamar Chase to take a pay cut, which is why the deal probably isn't done yet. He just had the best season of his career. And you think now is the time to ask me to take a pay cut after what I just displayed on the field? Come on now. Come on. I pray for every player to get what they feel they're deserved. And again, there's a difference between being smart with your money and not always recklessly spending, and being cheap, or lack of a better term, a cheapskate. And as unfortunate as it is, the Cincinnati Bengals organization has the reputation of being cheap. And there's also no coincidence that that's the same organization that hasn't won anything in their tenure. I wish the best for Trey Hendrickson. I hope that he finds a team that values him just as much as he values himself. Oh man, you stayed to the end of the video. I appreciate you. If you like what you saw, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss any content from your boy. You can also go back and watch past episodes, past clips, and don't forget that the Unpopular Podcast new episodes drop every Wednesday and Saturday. Appreciate you.